Welcome to this session. In this session, we're going to learn about homeostasis. In this, we're going to learn the definition of homeostasis, the scientist who gave the concept of milieu interior and homeostasis. We're going to study the feedback mechanisms and the feed-forward control systems with examples, and we're going to understand the gain and the importance of gain. What is the definition of homeostasis? Homeos, which means like, stasis, which means standing still. The definition of homeostasis is maintenance of nearly constant condition of internal environment of the extracellular fluid of the body. We know what is extracellular fluid. Almost all the physiological activities of the cell depends on internal environment, that is extracellular fluid of the body. Extracellular fluid, if there is any changes in this extracellular fluid, it will also affect the internal environment. Thus, extracellular fluid is considered as the internal environment of the extracellular fluid of the body. Here we have two scientists, Claude Bernard. He is the French physiologist who coined the term milieu interior. The meaning of milieu interior is internal environment. And Walter Bradford Kennan, he coined the term homeostasis. These are the factors which are involved in the maintenance of internal environment, maintenance of water and electrolyte balance, maintenance of acid-base regulation, acid-base balance, regulation of temperature, supply of nutrients, oxygen, hormones and enzymes, removal of metabolic and other waste products. Almost all the body systems play important role in the maintenance of internal environment. The mode of operation of all the systems is through two types of control systems, a feedback systems and a feed-forward control system. Feedback systems is again two types, positive and negative feedback system. The major difference between feedback systems and the feed-forward control system is feed-forward control system does not require stimulus. It is an anticipatory system, so no time lag is present in the feed-forward control system. A feedback system requires stimulus, so time lag is present in the feedback systems. Before going into the feedback mechanisms, we should know the control system. So here we have a controlled variable. If there is any disturbance in the controlled variable, for example, we said there are many factors like pH, blood pressure, or any hormonal level. So this disturbance will be sensed and the feedback signal will go to the controller. And the output will be reached to the effector organ and the correction will be done in the controlled variable. So this is the control system. And if we take the negative feedback system, we said the feedback systems and feed-forward control systems are the control systems which operates and they regulate or they maintain the internal environment. So what is negative feedback system? If the activity of particular system is increased or decreased, a control system initiates a series of changes that returns the activity towards the normal. Feedback system, especially negative feedback mechanism, works in opposite direction. Majority of the body system functions through negative feedback mechanism. So it is the most active mechanism. We will see some of the examples for negative feedback mechanism. So most of the hormonal regulation, temperature regulation, pH regulation, and blood pressure regulation, all these are the examples for negative feedback regulation, negative feedback systems. And here we have an example which is showing the regulation of glucocorticoid secretion. So here we have in this picture hypothalamus. There are neurons which are secreting some hormones in the hypothalamus. Even hypothalamus is considered as endocrine gland because it secretes various releasing and inhibitory hormones. Like for example, we can say growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibitory hormone, thyrotrophin releasing hormone, catecholotropin releasing hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, all these are releasing hormones which are released from the hypothalamus. So here we have, in this example, we are having corticotrophin releasing hormone. So that is released from the hypothalamus. This corticotrophin releasing hormone acts on anterior pituitary. So pituitary is an endocrine gland where anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary, two parts are there, and anterior pituitary again secretes different hormones. So when corticotrophin releasing hormone acts on corticotrophs, which are the cells which are present in the anterior pituitary, it will release the adrenocorticotrophic hormone, which is usually called as ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. This acts on the adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex will release various hormones. So this is one of the hormone which is released from the adrenal cortex, that is cortisol. So if we take the negative feedback system, if there is any disturbance or if there is any increase in the cortisol level, the negative feedback signal will send to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is the controller. So hypothalamus will decrease the secretion of, or this inhibits the release of corticotrophin releasing hormone, or this negative feedback inhibition, even it can directly inhibit the anterior pituitary so that it will inhibit the secretion of adrenocorticotrophic hormone. So in both the ways, corticotrophin releasing hormone and adrenocorticotrophin releasing hormone both will decrease or the secretion will be inhibited. So the increased cortisol level will be controlled to come to the normal level. So this activity is returned to the normal. So this is how the negative feedback mechanism works. So there is one more example, which is the very good example for negative feedback mechanism, that is baroreceptor reflex. In our body, blood pressure, whenever there is a change in the posture, blood pressure is regulated by baroreceptor reflex, which is one of the short-term regulatory mechanism, which is actually a type of nervous regulation which acts quickly within seconds to bring back the blood pressure which is altered when there is a change in the posture. So baroreceptor reflex, how it works? What are the baroreceptors? Baroreceptors are usually receptors which are respond to the pressure. So here, whenever there is change in the blood pressure, in this example, when the blood pressure becomes elevated, the baroreceptors, these two are the baroreceptor which are present in the internal carotid artery and in the arch of aorta. So carotid sinus and aortic arch, both of these are called as baroreceptors. So when the change in the blood pressure, these receptors will fire and the signals, the stimulus will be carried through cranial nerves to the medulla. In the medulla, the increase, here in this example, when the blood pressure increases, a parasympathetic activity will be increased, which in turn causes vasodilatation, which decreases the total peripheral resistance. And at the same time, the sympathetic activity will be decreased, which in turn decreases heart rate and stroke volume. Both of these decreases cardiac output. So ultimately, the blood pressure came to the normal level. So this is how baroreceptor reflex works. This is one of the negative feedback system. We told that negative feedback mechanism works in opposite direction. When blood pressure becomes elevated, this decreases to the normal level. So this is how negative feedback system works. So what is gain? So gain is the measure of the efficiency of the control system. So gain is used to measure the degree of effectiveness of the control system. So gain is calculated by correction divided by error. So here we have an example. A person is doing treadmill running. His systolic blood pressure rise to 180 millimeters of mercury. On stopping the exercise, his systolic blood pressure falls to 150 millimeters of mercury. We all know that normal systolic blood pressure is 120 millimeters of mercury. So what is the gain of this control system? So what is the formula for gain? Gain equals correction divided by error. So in this example, 180 is the raised blood pressure, elevated blood pressure. What is the correction which happened? 150 millimeters of mercury. So the correction is from 180, it is corrected to 150. The correction is 30 millimeters of mercury. But still there is error. So it is only reached to 150. it does not came back to 120 millimeters of mercury. So the error is also 30 millimeters of mercury. So here you can see gain is correction divided by error. Correction is 30 millimeters of mercury, whereas error is 30 millimeters of mercury. So the gain is 1. The very important thing to know is any system that leaves error is not 100% effective. Here we have 3 examples. So kidney in blood pressure regulation has a infinitive feedback gain principle. Higher the gain, higher the efficiency. The very important thing to know is the correction should be higher and the error should be less. So baroreceptor reflex, it has a gain of -2, and among the physiological control systems, temperature regulating system has a very high gain, which is -33. It is the one of the most efficient control systems of the body. So we told higher the gain, higher the efficiency. So now we'll come to positive feedback mechanism. So positive feedback mechanism works in same direction. Positive feedback mechanism. Here we have some of the examples of the positive feedback mechanism. Positive feedback mechanism is also called as vicious cycle because it usually harmful and even it can cause death sometimes. So in this example, when the bleeding occurs more than 2 liters of blood, the blood pressure is decreased, which decreases blood flow to the heart. This weakens the heart, which also decreases the pumping effect of the heart. So this ultimately decreases blood pressure again, and this positive feedback cycle can cause death when there is a bleeding of more than 2 liters of blood. But here in this graph you can see when the bleeding is more than 2 liters, it can decreases the pumping effect of the heart and this decreases blood pressure, which can cause death. But if the bleeding is only 1 liters, if the positive feedback is mild degree, it can be overcome by negative feedback mechanism and vicious cycle fails to develop. Here we can see if the bleeding is less than 1 liter, then the pumping effect of the heart will come to the normal level because of the action of negative feedback mechanism. So here we have some examples. Sometimes positive feedback can serve useful purposes. So here we have one example, which is parturition. At the time of delivery, the head of the baby is pushed towards the cervix of the uterus. So this produces a cervical stretch, which in turn induces the fundus contraction. A fundus contraction pushes the baby downwards and stretches the cervix more. This cycle repeats over and again. And there is one more thing which we must remember. So when the head of the baby is pushed towards the cervix, the feedback signals will also goes to the hypothalamus. I told you hypothalamus has some neurons. There are 2 different types of neurons which are especially involved in the secretion of posterior pituitary hormones, which are called as supraoptic and paraventricular neurons. So paraventricular neurons secretes a hormone which is called as oxytocin. The oxytocin will have 2 functions. One is it will increase the uterine contractions, other it will involved in the milk ejection. Both of these are examples of positive feedback mechanism. So whenever the baby pushes the cervix, the positive feedback signals will reach the hypothalamus through the afferent nerves, and hypothalamus will secrete this oxytocin, which will induce uterine contractions. So again the baby is pushed towards the cervix and this cycle repeats till the baby is born. So this is one of the positive feedback cycle which is useful. And here we have the second example. The generation of nerve signals by the vicious cycle of the progressive leakage of sodium ions from the channels set up following stimulation of membrane nerve fiber is due to the positive feedback. So here we can see clearly whenever the sodium enters into the cell, this depolarizes nerve or muscle membrane, which in turn increases the sodium permeability by opening of the more number of sodium channels. So this in turn increases the entry of sodium into the cell. So this cycle repeats. So this cycle is also called as Hodgkin cycle. So this is one of the mechanism how the nerve signals are generated. So the next example, which is also a positive feedback mechanism, that is clot formation. Here we can see there are different steps in the mechanism of coagulation, and a thrombin will be formed, which is very important to convert prothrombin into thrombin, which is one of the steps in the blood coagulation. So this thrombin, it will activate and it will accelerate the clot formation by a positive feedback cycle. This is also an example for positive feedback mechanism. And one more example, which is milk ejection reflex, which is also called as neuroendocrine reflex, milk letdown reflex. All these are other names. So in this milk ejection reflex, when the baby suckles the nipple, the touch receptors get stimulated in the nipple, which sends signals to the hypothalamus. Again, oxytocin is released from the hypothalamus, which in turn helps in the ejection of milk from the nipples. So this cycle continues when the baby till the baby suck the nipple. So this is one of the positive feedback mechanism. So we must remember the examples of positive feedback mechanism. We have a mnemonic, which is clasp. So C for clotting mechanism, that is thrombin, which accelerates the clot formation. Lactation, that is the milk ejection reflex or milk letdown reflex, which is one of the positive feedback mechanism. Action potential, we said Hodgkin cycle, right? So that is also an example for positive feedback mechanism. LH surge. So at the time of ovulation, just before the ovulation, there is a peak of luteinizing hormone secretion. That is also an example for positive feedback mechanism. And parturition. So at the time of delivery, that is also a positive feedback mechanism. So this is just to remember the examples of positive feedback mechanism. Clasp, C for clotting, L for lactation, A for action potential, S for LH surge, P for parturition. So anticipatory adaptive control system. It does not require stimulus. It anticipates and makes corrective changes. It is also called as anticipatory or adaptive control system. So here we have some of the examples. Thermoregulation, receptive relaxation of stomach, that is, even before the food reaches the stomach will undergo relaxation. Anticipatory tachycardia, that is, increase in the heart rate even before the start of exercise. Cephalic phase of gastric juice secretion of gastric juice, HCl, from the stomach by sight, thought and smell of the food. So that is cephalic phase of gastric secretion. Even before the food reaches the stomach, because of the sight, thought and the smell of the food, there will be gastric juice secretion. So this is also an example for anticipatory control system. So we'll end with the MCQs. Which of the following is a negative feedback mechanism? Blood clotting, milk letdown reflex, regulation of blood pressure, parturition reflex. So which will be the answer? So you know, regulation of blood pressure, we told. Baroreceptor reflex, that is the example for negative feedback mechanism. So all the other things, blood clotting, milk letdown reflex, parturition reflex, all these are examples of positive feedback mechanism. Which is not true regarding feed forward control system. System anticipates and makes corrective changes. Example is increase in heart rate even before the start of exercise. It is also called as anticipatory or adaptive control system. It requires stimulus. So which is not true here. So anticipatory control system does not require stimulus. That is why no time lag is present in the anticipatory control system. So the answer is D. So this is the same example which we have seen in the gain. A person is doing treadmill running. His systolic BP rises to 180 millimeters of mercury. On stopping the exercise, his systolic BP falls to 150 millimeters of mercury immediately. What is the gain of this control system? So we said correction is 30 millimeters of mercury and the error is 30 millimeters of mercury. So the gain here is 1. So that is the gain. So the gain is 1. What are the examples of positive feedback system? So regulation of pH, regulation of hormones, regulation of temperature, generation of nerve signal, which is the example. So here regulation of pH, regulation of hormone, regulation of temperature, all these are examples of negative feedback system. This generation of nerve signals, or we told the other name, Hodgkin cycle, that is the example of positive feedback mechanism. Excessive formation of a substance or secretion in the body is controlled in order to maintain homeostasis by positive feedback mechanism, negative feedback mechanism, osmosis, hemodynamics. So which will be the answer? Yes, it is negative feedback mechanism. So whenever there is increase or decrease in the substance, negative feedback mechanism will bring back the substance towards the normal level. So that is negative feedback mechanism. It works in opposite direction. Positive feedback mechanism works in the same direction. Milieu interior is a term introduced by, yes, only two scientists we should remember, Walter B. Cannon, that is Walter Bradford Cannon, and Claude Bernard. So Claude Bernard introduced the term milieu interior, which means internal environment, whereas Walter Bradford Cannon introduced the term homeostasis. So the word homeostasis is coined by Walter Bradford Cannon, W.B. Cannon or Walter Bradford Cannon. Effectiveness of control system is assessed by gain, loss, recovery, improvement in function. So we know gain is the one which is used to measure effectiveness of the control system. So to summarize this session, homeostasis is defined as maintenance of nearly constant condition of the internal environment of extracellular fluid of the body. So this homeostasis is maintained mainly by feedback systems and feed-forward control system. So there are two different types of feedback system, negative feedback and positive feedback system. Negative feedback system works in opposite direction. Positive feedback system works in the same direction. Gain is used to measure the effectiveness of feedback system, and feed forward control system is also called as anticipatory system. Thank you.